is William J. Russell. The J stands for the last name of my paternal side of my family, and it stands for Joy, J-O-Y. That was the last name of on the paternal side of my family, and I've always been happy to have that middle name of Joy. I was also known as, been known as Bill when I was in school and growing up, and when I was in high school, I was even known as Wild Bill. We won't go into that. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I wish I was better prepared. It's been an unusual week. Mary Jane's daughter from Florida and her granddaughter from Boston were with us most of each day, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So I didn't have a lot of time to put into preparing for the service today, but I'll do the best I can. The 13th chapter of Paul's first letter to the Corinthians begins, and you heard it a moment ago. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels and have not love, I am only a sounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Many New Testament scholars believe that these words were part of an early Christian hymn or song, and were perhaps inserted by Paul or perhaps a later editor of Paul's letters. It concludes, now these three abide, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Now, every summer, up until COVID, Mary Jane and I tried to spend some time at the Chautauqua Institution, usually a full week at a time. And there we attended the worship services, went to lectures, and spent time visiting the bookstore. Now, we have to just discipline ourselves very carefully when we go into a bookstore to buy only one or two books while we were there. And in the bookstore at the Chautauqua Institution, there's a shelf with little wooden wall plaques with cute sayings on them, which I enjoyed reading. One of those little wall plaques had a brief saying on it. It caught my attention because it was so meaningful, and also because it was easy to remember. It said, live with purpose, love with abundance. All of today's readings reminded me of the words on that plaque. The Old Testament reading from the book of Ruth was set in the time of Judges, which in the Old Testament was sometime around the 11th century BCE. The story begins with the plight of a woman named Naomi and her husband Elimelech and their sons Mahlon and Chilion. According to the story, they were living in Bethlehem when the region experienced a severe drought and the crops failed. Seeking food, they moved from Bethlehem to the country of Moab. Now, Moab was east of Bethlehem, on the other side of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, a distance of about 50 miles. But bad luck continued to haunt Naomi. Her husband died. Her sons took Moabite wives, foreigners that is. And then both sons died, leaving Naomi with two daughters-in-law. In that time and in that culture, a woman without a father or a husband or a son was destitute. She was on the streets in a very real sense. In this instance, there were three women with no means of support. At that point, Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem to see if she can find next of kin who will take her in. She advises her daughters-in-law to return to their own families and find new husbands. One of the daughters-in-law, Opah, takes Naomi's advice and returns home. But Ruth makes an impassioned and memorable plea. Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where I go, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you. In this story, which is really a long and sophisticated parable, Ruth has found a purpose for which to live. Her purpose is to find a way to protect and provide for her mother-in-law, Naomi. And she is also loving Naomi with abundance. To make a short story even shorter, they returned to Bethlehem in the land of Judah. Naomi locates a next of kin, a man named Boaz. Now, Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, assumes responsibility for Naomi. He marries Ruth, and they give birth to a son, Obed. The women of the town gather around Naomi and celebrate. With a grandson, Naomi's future is guaranteed and protected. But may I suggest that you go and read the rest of the story for yourself. It's not a very long book. You could read it in a half hour, read the whole book in a half hour. Anyway, do that, the book of Ruth. You will appreciate the story even more when you know its historical background. People who read the Bible literally assume that they are reading about an historical event that occurred about 3,000 years ago, about 1000 BCE. The book of Ruth is actually a parable that was written sometime sometime in the 6th century BCE, during or right after the Babylonian captivity. Now, in 587 BCE, the Babylonian army conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, tore down the walls, and thoroughly humiliated the Jewish people. It also marked the beginning of the Babylonian exile, which many people assume that all the people of Israel were taken to Babylon in captivity. Well, not so. Only members of the king's court, the chief priests of the temple, the scribes, and men who could read and write, and young men of valor who could serve in their army. In other words, the Babylonians only took the men who could be of service to them. Of course, they took some wives and concubines as well. Left behind were the poor, the uneducated, the infirm, and many who were laborers in the fields and in the olive groves. Without political or religious leadership, many of the men began to take wives from the surrounding areas, particularly Moab and Samaria. About 50 years after the exile began, a man named Cyrus and his Persian army conquered the Babylonian kingdom. And in 537 BCE, Cyrus decreed that all the exiles could return to their homelands. In fact, he encouraged it. 2 men were appointed by Cyrus to return to Jerusalem with the Jewish exiles. Nehemiah was appointed by Cyrus to be governor, with instructions to rebuild the walls of the city and restore the temple. As a priest, it was Ezra's task to restore the worship in the temple and teach the people the laws, beliefs, and rituals of the Jewish religion. But then Ezra and Nehemiah made a monumental mistake. They did something that was cruel and insensitive by any standard in any age. They decreed that all the men of Israel who had married foreign wives, that is, women from Moab and Samaria, would have to divorce their wives and send their wives and children back to their homelands. This set the stage for an unknown author to take pen in hand and to oppose and challenge the decree by writing a story, the story of Ruth. The point of the parable of Ruth is that though they were even though they were foreign-born wives, they were worthy of being members of the Jewish faith and nation. Like Ruth, they were capable of living with purpose and loving with abundance. Apparently, the author of the parable of Ruth achieved his goal. Only a handful of men obeyed the edict and sent their wives and children away. In the reading from the New Testament, the author of the Gospel of Mark recounts an event that had been circulating in the oral traditions for over 40 years. A scribe overhears Jesus debating with a group of Sadducees, that is a religious sect within Judaism at the time. The scribes were equivalent to lawyers in today's culture. They could read and write. It was their responsibility to preserve the law in written form and provide interpretations to the people. It was a scribe that posed a legal question to Jesus. Which commandment is first of all? And Jesus answered. The first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Hearing this, the scribe responded, You are right. God is one, and we are to love God and to love one's neighbor as oneself. This is more important than all our sacrifices and burnt offerings. To put this in contemporary language, to live with purpose is to love and affirm that which is holy and sacred. In contemporary theology, all life, all creation is holy and sacred. To love with abundance is first and foremost to love yourself, for you are of great value. And then your life, your being, is a part of that which is holy and sacred. Further, if you love your neighbor as you love yourself, you have to begin with a healthy respect or love for yourself. Then if you love others as you love yourself, you will desire that others have the opportunity to be all that they have the ability and capacity to be. In the 21st century, we know that we are living in a vast universe that is at least 25 billion light years in depth, and which has no boundaries that we know of. There is no eternal being sitting on the throne up above the sky somewhere who will judge us and reward us or come to our rescue. Rather, in the words of Paul Tillich, God is being itself, and the essence of being is the relationship of love. It is from love that all our values flow: justice, equality, compassion, mercy, forgiveness, acceptance, affirmation, and peace. To worship God in the 21st century is to acknowledge that God is love by loving others. Here in this place, this church, this sanctuary, we have a community that lives out these values of love. There is affirmation, acceptance, support, compassion, and genuine friendships among all the members, all the people of the Orchard Park United Methodist Church. Here at the Orchard Park United Methodist Church, we will offer exceptional love and care to those about us. All of us, because of the greatness of God's love, are bound together in love and fellowship. And the service ends as it began. We are to live with purpose. We are to love with abundance. And we are to be members of one another, caring for and supporting each other in this place of worship and fellowship.